Okay, so we can start.
Perfect.
OK，欢迎大家来听我们今天的讲座。我是本次讲座的主持人张宁，是投币德学术的创办人，在美国首都华盛顿向大家问好。科研探索是一个漫长而艰辛的过程，从开题实验到分析数据、写作，最后将文章发表在国际学术期刊上。可能很多人认为文章已经发表了就可以高枕无忧，其实不是这样的。怎样让您的研究成果让业内同行知道，并且引用您的成果，在这个信息爆炸的时代变得更加重要。今天我们邀请了来自英国的 Tom Render 为大家带来一场精彩的报告。报告的题目是文章发表以后如何宣传自己的研究成果。Tom 拥有8年以上的专业传播经验，其中5年专门从事多媒体科学传播。他目前主要负责 Science Diffusion 的内容创作和传播策略，以确保在所有部门中产生最大的影响。Tom 还统筹着与作者、研究所、期刊和编辑成员的关系，并全面管理 Science Diffusion。Tom 热衷于推动学术出版发展，并使科学更加开放、易于访问和贴于实际。Okay. Tom has over 8 years of professional communications experience with a 5-year specialization in multimedia science communication. He is currently responsible for content creation and dissemination strategy for Science Diffusion, ensure the highest possible impact across all sectors. Tom also manages its relationship with authors, institutes, journals, and editorial members for their overall administration of Science Diffusion. Tom is passionate to advance scholarly publishing and make science more open, accessible, and tangible. Today, Tom will give us a talk. The title is International Impact and Research Marketing Beyond Publication. Okay, you can start, Tom. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ning. Appreciate that introduction. And welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Really glad to have you here. I'm sure Ning probably already mentioned, but we are able to be interactive today as well. So I have a presentation to give, obviously, this International Impact Research and Marketing Beyond Publication. But if you have any questions along the way, just let us know that in the chat box, and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. Keen to make sure we answer all your questions today as well. So we get stuck in then. So this is what we're going to be looking to cover, the kind of information I want to take you through today. So firstly, we're going to look at the Hollywood principle. Then we'll look at the small change you can make to your outreach articles today that will enable you to have more readers and enable them to remember you better. We're going to be looking at why New Age radio matters for you and how researchers can compete with primetime TV, which I think will be most interesting for a lot of you. How can we get into the home life of the average person and interact with them as well? So I think to give a quick introduction, so I'll skip over that. But this is me. I'm Tom Render. Been doing communications for a long time. So if we get stuck in also, Science Diffusion or Sciencia is our magazine, often the consumer-facing brand name that we go by, or Science Diffusion is the company name. And essentially what we do is help researchers like yourself communicate outside of that direct peer group. So we take peer-reviewed work, translate it into something more easily understood, and distribute it to everybody who wouldn't have read that peer-reviewed piece. Obviously, with the idea being to get not only more people to read the peer-reviewed paper, but also to communicate to everybody who would never understand that paper and would never be able to read it. So communications in that broader sense of capacity. So I think the first thing for us to look at is why is communication important in this broader sense of the word? Why are we going to do sort of research marketing? Once you've published a paper, why should we continue to do these types of communication? Well, what kind of effect can we have? That's what we're going to look at. So firstly, I think the thing to keep in mind as to why this is important for you is to think about the title, right? International impact and research beyond that publication, right? You've got a publication out there and then you're wanting to do something with that. So you might be looking for international collaborations. You might be looking to recruit people into your lab. You might be looking to get funding from whether it be a government department or a private investment, looking to reach out to businesses, get yourself into international journals and other publications, things like that. So you want to think about, if we're wanting to achieve those objectives, what's important to those groups who control those doors, right? We want to go through their gate. We want to have, whether it be, if we want a collaboration, for example, with somebody in the US, how are we going to make that happen? Well, we need to satisfy whatever needs they are looking for. There's a lot of competition out there. There's a lot of researchers. There's, like 3,000 papers published every day. And so how are you going to stand out in the marketplace? So if we first look at funding agencies all around the world love science communication a lot. It doesn't matter, the Chinese Institute, they describe it as increasing the knowledge base of all citizens. The US often use the term border impacts. I think in New Zealand, they use knowledge transfer. In Canada, I think they use the same sort of phrasing. It doesn't really matter what kind of wording they use, but every funding agency around the world likes to see somebody doing this kind of public engagement, this kind of border impacts, because it helps them. Is the reason they want to see you do it is because it doesn't matter if you're in, for example, if you're in a democracy, obviously you need to be informing government policymakers so they can make policy around your research, and then you need to inform the public so they can vote about it. But if you don't live in a democracy, it's still important. Like, it doesn't matter what government scheme you have or whatever setup you've got, you still need to inform policymakers about what has been funded in order for them to make policy about it. And then you still want to inform the public about it so they can have, because it's not, you don't want to have some sort of horrible revolt or some people being really upset. It's much easier just to communicate to people why this is important and why you're doing it, whether they were voting in that situation or not. You still want to communicate to both those groups. And so therefore, funding agencies really appreciate all this style of communications. It also protects their own budgets, right? If you think you've got to apply for a grant to that funding agency, well, that funding agency in turn has to apply to the government for funds to be able to allocate in the first instance. And the more kind of noise that you're making around why your work is important, the more the funding agency can justify its own importance and therefore secure new funding itself. So it's a very circular process, and that's why funding agencies like it. So there's a reason we should be doing it. Because you can think of the example, right? If you've got two chemists and they both publish good papers in good journals and they both do good work, but one's got millions of people on board and communicates really well to governmental figures and the other person doesn't, who do you think is going to get well funded, right? And especially on an international scale, right? Where perhaps you don't have that quite the same brand reputation that you might have in your own country. So that's another good way to go look at it. If we look at the NSF, I mean, we kind of touched on that. They call it border impacts, but it's incredibly important for them to do. And they, in fact, don't fund anybody that can't demonstrate that they do this border impact or this border style of communication. So if you were wanting to make a collaboration with somebody in the US and you can bring to the table a huge amount of this border impact, it's much easier for them to go, yeah, let's go with that department or that person because they can help us in this effort, which our funding agency like. And so you're giving them what they want. So it's a very good way to get into the door into international collaborations. Also, universities measure it, right? Institutions all around the world, similar sort of thing. If you've got a researcher in your lab or your department who stands on an international stage and has a lot of attention and is able to secure new funding and easily get partnerships, and there's a lot of inbound kind of activities from their output of good communications, it's much easier for the university then to do what they want to do, which is recruit students and faculty members and highlight themselves, right? It's much easier, if you've got quite you can say famous scientist or researcher working for you as a university, it's much easier to recruit students because you can leverage that brand name and what they're doing. And you can say, look at what we're doing here at this university, come and be a part of that. And so again, it's useful for universities, and we're seeing all around the world. This is an example from University of South Australia, where they're literally making promotion and tenure decisions based off of this kind of information. Obviously, it's not the only element, but it is going into their decision-making process. If they've got two researchers, again, with good work, published in good papers, published in good journals, things like that, and then what's next? This broader impact. Which one of them is doing more work in terms of this communications, is able to get better attention and therefore bring that attention to our university? So it's an important element. So that's why we should be doing that. The other reason would be because the public really like it as well. If you start looking around, and you probably start noticing this if you haven't already, but if you look on blogs or YouTube videos that we're looking at here, podcasts, it doesn't really matter where you're looking. Science is really prevalent and it's viewed in huge numbers. Here we can see TED, TED Talks, TED Education, 7.3 million subscribers. Right, that's a huge amount of people subscribing to this. Now, it is arguable, obviously, that TED is a very big brand. They don't just talk about science, things like that, although this is their education channel. And so I wanted to highlight just a couple of others, which I'm sure you've not heard of, right? There's Kyrgyzstan, I'm sure you've never heard of that, but they've got almost 7 million subscribers themselves, and they just talk about science, right? Everyday people are starting these channels, not just huge corporations, and they're getting millions of people subscribed and views. Like, look at these videos, how engaged they are. People are wanting to hear about the science. And all of these are communicated in a layman-friendly way, right? They speak well to the average person. And so therefore they can capture these big audiences. We've got a whole bunch here, you just go on and on and on of, how engaged you can be. This one's about physics. I think one of these about here is chemistry. Still 1 million people viewing this. 19 million people viewed that one video there. So people are very interested in this. And again, it just helps all of that circle of influence that you can create for yourself. So that's why we should be engaging in these sorts of things, which I'm sure if you're on this webinar, you're probably aware of some of these things, or at least have a good sense that this kind of communications can really help you. I want you to think about a scenario, if your research has been engaged with by millions of people, supported by the public, governmental officials and funding agencies really value what you do because you've communicated well to them, and universities are wanting your work in their university. How much easier is your life going to be? It's going to be so much easier for you to get the things that you want because you have that stage now to speak from. And so that's what we're looking at. That's the objectives. That's what we want to do, which I'm sure you're on board with, as I said, because that's why you're here. So let's get into how can we make that happen, because that's ultimately where I think a lot of people are falling down. So the 4 main points that we're going to cover. Hollywood principle, this is about the distribution. How do we get in front of these people? And then 2, 3, and 4 are the kind of the tangible pieces that we're going to develop. So if we look into them. So firstly, the Hollywood principle. Now, if you think about what do TV shows and movies do, right? If Hollywood have produced a movie, right, that's like you producing a peer-reviewed piece. And so now you want people to go and see that movie or hear about it, or at least understand what it is, watch a trailer, that sort of thing. How do they do that? Well, they get all of the actors to go on talk shows. They get them to give interviews to journalists in a written format. They go on talk shows, on radio shows, and they go on talk shows on TV or YouTube videos or wherever it might be, right? Wherever these things are being broadcast, it doesn't matter. They go around all the different places where there's already an audience that could be interested, right? So if you could for example, we've got, between our sort of syndicated audiences, we estimate we reach over 1 million people. So for every researcher that we feature in our magazine and things like that, they've got the potential to be in front of millions of people because they've already built an audience for them. And the same sort of thing, you want to think about that concept. How can I get this work in front of all these different people? I just go to the places where they already exist. We already know, we've seen through those YouTube videos there, that people are looking for science, they're wanting to see about it, they're engaged with it. And so you just need to get onto those platforms and kind of do the tour. I do the circuit like an actor would do promoting their movie. So that's kind of a principle of, once we've produced those materials, what are we going to do with them? Where are we going to take them? And have that kind of in mind. How can we get that distribution? Because there's no point in writing an article or something like that if nobody's going to read it. And so you want to think about that distribution side of things. And that's really the pinnacle of how you can do that, is just go and look, where are these people already congregated? Where are they already looking for the research and the science? And then just put it in front of them. So that's the first principle to keep in mind. The second is, I think a lot of you already produce text articles. If you don't, obviously, as I will mention throughout, but that is what we do. We do it as a done-for-you service. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But if you are producing articles in a written format, the small change that you can make that will really make people remember your research and make it really stand out is to include images. It's really important, and I think it's one where obviously in the peer-reviewed piece, other than diagrams and graphics and things, you don't put a lot of imagery in there. So it can often be forgotten that you're not just translating that text into a more sort of layman-friendly language. You want the imagery to go with it, and for some really important reasons. So people who have coupled text with imagery get their retention rate 6 times the typical amount. Right, so if we look at this, right, this is a study done by John Medina. He found if you just have the text, basically after 3 days, only about 10% of the information is retained. If it's all in a kind of infographic, you get about 35%. But if you use the both in conjunction, you get a 65% retention rate of that information. So that's wildly different. If you think about putting these articles in front of a governmental official or something like that, and 3 days later they're in a meeting about who they're going to fund, well, the person with the written and the visuals in there and the images is more likely to be top of mind. They're going to be able to recall more information from the studies that they've read about and things like that. And so therefore, they're more likely to get that funding. So these are important elements to keep in mind. Other sort of just data on this, is very well documented that people look at images way more than they look at anything else when they're scanning through, whether it be text on a page or an internet page or whatever it might be. So important there as well. The other side, obviously, as we've mentioned, is obviously getting that distribution. How do you get people to see it in the first instance? Images. Use the imagery from your article onto the social media platforms that are going to promote it. You get a 650% higher engagement rate with a picture and text than you do just a text-only post across social media channels. That's obviously a bit of an average. But it is really important. Tweets with images receive 150% more retweets than tweets without. It's really, really important to be coupling your written work with imagery, good imagery that stands out and shows people exactly what they need to engage with. It kind of tells that story through the imagery. Really important element to keep in mind. The next element we're going to touch on is, why does New Age radio matter for research? So what we're talking about here, we're talking about podcasting. Now, I'm sure many of you are very aware of podcasts, as China is very much leading the way in the podcast market. So Zomalia, I think I'm going to say that terribly wrong. So apologies for that. But that's just one company, and they've got 530 million listeners who are listening to an hour and 47 minutes of podcasts a day on average. Right, that's just one company. So we know podcast platforms are huge in China, and a very good platform for you to be talking to whether it be governmental officials, businesses, or the public. You can really get your research out there on those platforms, and internationally. Across every country across the world, podcasts are continuously on the rise as well in every corner of the globe. Every country has a huge engaged audience on podcasting. There are literally millions upon millions and hundreds of millions of people listening to podcasts every single day. I think there's something like 850 million active users just on Apple Podcasts. Again, that's just one channel for people to be listening on. So, we know they're engaged in huge quantities around the globe. But why are we going to pick this platform over perhaps a written one? Well, because of these statistics, right? So 74% of podcast listeners to podcasts to learn something new, right? They're coming to be educated. They're wanting to learn something. 68% more likely for a podcast listener to have a postgraduate degree, and 45% of podcast listeners enjoy more than $250,000 in annual household income. So people listening to podcasts are wanting to learn stuff. They're well educated and they've got funds. That tells me they're in important positions, whether they be an executive in a business or a government department. Perhaps they're other researchers. Perhaps a lot of you on this call listen to podcasts and things like that yourselves. You can think about the type of demographic that you can reach on these platforms. Could be some of the most influential people in the world. The statistics will be telling us that. And so getting into their ears, explaining your science, putting yourself on that platform is a really, really good way to go. We have a sister company called SciPod, and we very much see that. We see that they've got, a very big standout demographic for us is the executive market, as well as other researchers, national governing organizations, things like that make up a big proportion of our listeners. And so again, thinking about how can I get in front of these people? Well, you would use somebody who's already established an audience, right? Using that Hollywood principle. We already have, potentially millions of people that are going to listen to our podcasts and audiobooks and things. And so therefore you can just publish with us, or again, it doesn't have to be us, it could be somebody else. But thinking about that, where's an audience already congregated? Let's go there and put my research in front of them, rather than trying to build your own audience, which obviously can be extremely difficult. The other thing, and we've kind of touched on this, is the popularity of science just in general. Comedy is the most popular genre of podcasting, but the second is education. Like, people are really, really wanting to learn stuff through podcasting. It's very important for them to be getting educational materials in podcast formats. So it's a really good medium for us to get out there on an international stage, get in front of the right types of people, get in front of influential people that you want to do collaborations with or have investment from. They're trying to listen out for your research, and you just need to be there. So that's the podcast game. And then we move on from there. We've got the video side of things, right? How can we compete with the public's attention for that TV slot? Like, primetime TV is the hours of roughly 5, 6 in the evening to about 9, 10 o'clock in the evening. So that, people getting in from work, they're sitting down, they're relaxing for the evening, they put the TV on. How can we compete in that environment? How can we get our science in front of them? And the simple answer is YouTube. Be on YouTube, right? YouTube is now reaching more adults, not kids, adults, during primetime viewing hours than cable TV is. Right, so just simply being on this platform is where the attention is going. That's where people are going. Again, going back to that Hollywood principle. Where are people? Where can we put our research in order for it to be found? The answer is YouTube and other video platforms, of course. So Cisco projects internet traffic will be 82% of it will be video by 2021. So we're knocking on the door of 2021, and we know video is going to be a huge dominant player. We've already seen that. I'm sure all of us are very aware of how dominant video is on any platform, whether it be YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn or WeChat, or doesn't matter. Video is shared, it is consumed in huge quantities. We've also seen on Facebook, 85% of the videos there are watched without sound, which is really interesting. So we produce videos. We produce animated videos for that reason, because they can be used across platform. That animation gives the ability for it to be watched without the sound, as well as obviously you can put the subtitles on there as well. So that's a very important element. If you're thinking about, okay, I want to use video, I want to reach these millions of people, your video is more likely to get shared than anything else. You've got to think about those people watching it without sound. How are they going to engage with that video? And you want good imagery, graphics in there, and the subtitles as well, which is something that we've certainly seen works really, really well. Another thing on the distribution of that, using the word video in an email, say, hey, watch this video, something like that, you'll see a better click-through rate, i.e. the amount of people who are opening the email, and the amount of people who click through to, open rate is how many people opening it, click-through rate is the amount of people clicking the link to go and watch that video, right? So there's a lot here to take in. And so we just kind of run through that a little bit together, right? We've looked at each individual instance of what we're going to do. What does it all mean, right? We've looked at all these different things. How does all of this come together? 85% of adults consume content in multiple devices at the same time, right? I'm sure you've done this yourself. You've got your laptop open, you're clicking through your mobile phone, the TV's on in the background, perhaps the radio's on while you're answering emails. All these different things, all these different content platforms, all these different channels that you could possibly be on. Well, what do you pick? We should really just pick it all. If you can get there, you should do it all, because you want to be everywhere that somebody's looking to consume you. Don't make friction for the consumer, right? If I work in a government division and I generally consume all of my information through video and podcasts, and you're not there, I'm not going to discover you. I'm not going to find out about it very easily. Even if you sent me the information, I'm sure you see this yourself. you'll probably have your favorite mediums. I tend to find most researchers like written stuff. So if I sent you a bunch of videos and a bunch of articles, perhaps you're more likely to read the articles than watch the videos. And so if I only had a video for one particular project, then you might not ever see that because you only read the articles. Right? There's a lot of data, a lot of input coming in for people to consume. There's a lot of information out there. There's lots of options for them to pick. And so therefore, you don't want to create friction for that end consumer. You want to be everywhere on all these platforms. So written articles with imagery, being a podcast and audio platform, and you want to be producing a video, and then get it out everywhere, right? That Hollywood principle. How can you put this round all these different places, pick somewhere that's already got an audience and publish it to there? In the same way that you do with a peer-reviewed paper, it's really no different. Why do you look for journals with a high impact factor? Because people read them, right? You don't want to publish in a journal that nobody reads because it's not going to create any impact at all. And a similar sort of thing here. You don't just have to create a video and put it on your own channel. You can put it on somebody else's channel, right? Like, for example, we have a magazine. So articles go in there that we've produced, they get way more viewership than articles that are just put on somebody's individual website because we have a collection. We already have an audience built. I'm sure if any of you have got your own websites, I'm sure you don't have millions of people coming to view them every day. Yet there are millions of people looking for science, and they are congregated in these different areas already. And you just need to turn up in those places, in the mediums like we've discussed. And basically that's kind of the job done. And that way you've given yourself the most amount of potential for that impact, that broader impact, building those collaborations, getting that external investment, setting yourself up for a career move, whatever it might be that you're looking to achieve for this sort of thing, but you would have maximized your attention in that way. So I'm keen to know a little bit from you guys, any questions that you've got. If you found this was helpful, obviously, anything you want clearing up around these kind of topic areas as well, you can let me know that. Perhaps some of this could be a little bit confusing, perhaps, if you've not done it before. So don't think like a question is too simple, like what is a podcast or something like that. If you're not aware, it's just radio on the internet. It's basically what a podcast is. There's no question that's too simple here. I appreciate a lot of people could be doing this kind of communications for the first time. So please do let us know your questions because I've got plenty of time to go through them. The other thing I want to mention, which I have mentioned a little bit throughout this, is obviously please do go and do this yourself, regardless of whether you work with us or not. I highly recommend you start doing this kind of communications. You can't start too early. But if you do want some help and you'd like just us to do it for you, that is what we do. So you can follow this link, and hopefully there'll be a link coming up in the chat somewhere. It's scientia.global/science-communication-inquiry. There'll just be a little form there. You can fill it out and we can have a chat about how we can help you. But essentially what we would do is take your peer-reviewed paper, translate that into an article, an audiobook and or video, and then do all the distribution side of things. And it's all done for you. So you don't have to worry. Ultimately, we won't publish anything without your approval, of course. But it's a case where a lot of people want to do this sort of thing, and they want to be in all these different places, but they can't quite get it done themselves. And so we're here to help with that. So just wanted to mention that. But like I said, if you've got questions, please let them know. And hopefully, Ning, if there's some questions come through, you can start to let me know what they are. Have we got many questions come through so far?
No, not yet. Sorry.
Okay, well, no problem. I'll give people a few more minutes just in case they're trying to think or trying to type. Ning also obviously speak Chinese if you want to ask your questions in Chinese, and Ning perhaps translate if that might be easier for people. But otherwise, I mean, that was pretty much the message for today, is thinking about, the combination of putting together your work and your research into these different mediums and utilizing those few key elements, and then using that Hollywood principle of kind of taking it on tour, right? Going to all of these different places, getting your work out there into, the places where people already are. That's sort of the real main takeaway here. That's my presentation today. Ning, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask, or anything I've gone over there that perhaps you think people might be thinking about?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Tom. So, okay, so I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
How individual researcher promote their findings?
Sorry, cut out a little bit there. How does a researcher promote their
Yes,
findings?
yes.
So in terms of getting that message together and how you would present it, is obviously going to be slightly different if you have a applied field or you have more of a kind of fundamental theoretical field. If you've got an applied field, it's obviously a little bit easier because you can just talk about the applications. And I would still take that approach if you've got a fundamental project. I would talk about your research in not in the principles of like how did you do it and the very technical elements, because people for the most part, not that they don't care, but kind of they don't. It might sound a bit harsh, but they don't. What they care about is what does it mean. Right, so you don't need to go into a huge amount of technical detail or try and get all worked up and stressed about how you're going to explain exactly what it is that you do or the like really complicated theories behind whatever you do. You just need to talk about what the impact is. What does it mean for the average person? What does it mean for governments? What does it mean for businesses? What does it mean for society? What is it? That's the kind of question you want to think about answering. And then think about if somebody asked you that question who was perhaps like, but it could be your husband or your wife or a student or something like that. Imagine explaining a very technical thing to somebody like that, and they look a bit confused, and they just ask you the question, "Well, what does that even mean?" Or "Why should I care?" Think about how would you answer that. You would answer it by saying, "Well, it matters because," and then you would give the example. It matters because with this type of chemistry, what we can do is look to build vaccines off the back of it. Oh, okay, that's really important in this world of a pandemic then. Yes, it is. That's why fundamental research into chemistry is important. But you don't need to go into the details of how you do fundamental chemistry. You just need to explain its applications. And even if you're not in an applied field, you're not too far away from it. From a theoretical point, we go into an applied point. So you just need to connect the dots is all you need to do. Not think about, well, I'm not applied, so I can't do that. You can, because it will lead to something. Otherwise, why are we even doing it? That's kind of the crux of it is like, well, why are we doing it then? And you need to be able to just answer that question. That's how I would go about putting together, whether it be a video, an audio, or an article, I'd have that top of mind, which can be difficult, of course, when you're used to writing technical papers and you basically spend all of your time going through the minutiae and all the little details of how you've done it. You just want to get out of that and kind of just go straight to the discussion, right? Like, what does it mean? What's the next step? What can we do from this? That's how I'd answer that. Hopefully that helps, Ning.
Okay.
And do you have any other questions come through?
Okay, I will tell something. I will speak Chinese to audience. Yeah, so 刚才Tom 的意思就是你要想明白你为什么要做这件事情，而不是你怎么做这件事情。就是我以前也有过这样的我也听到过这样的说法，就是有一个什么电梯法则，就是你在电梯间里要跟别人讲明白你想你做的事情，这个是很重要的。就是 you can explain what why you do it in when you take an elevator. Yeah, it's a I mean
the elevator pitch. It's the elevator.
It's in very short time you can explain why you do it, what you did.
As in explaining your research, you mean?
Well, sorry?
You mean if somebody's trying to explain their research to make an elevator pitch? Mm-hmm. Yeah, same sort of thing. You just literally, I would just go straight to what does it mean? Because it's the only thing that, like if I had to give us a pitch, like an elevator pitch to all of this, I would just go with the straight, because this can get you every result in the world that your peer-reviewed paper can't. Like, it's very simple. Like, it's just going to talk about what's the effect. right? You're going to be able to communicate with people that can't read your peer-reviewed paper. That could include a governmental official, a funding agency, a business, or the public, right? So you just want to boil it down to its very literal key elements of what does it mean for society? What does it mean for government? What does it mean, pick 2 or 3 objectives or whatever they might be of what impact is your research going to have, and just communicate the outcomes.
这是要把你的这个工作的影响啊，你为什么要做这个工作，还有你这个工作产生的影响，很简单的告诉那些可能影响你的这些研究的人，就比如说政府啊，还有这个决策者呀，还有这个资助，当然还有基金委啊之类的这些单位。Okay, I have 2 questions from audience.
Yep.
What is the difference between Scientia and other platforms such as ResearchGate?
Yeah. The biggest difference is that we are a done-for-you service. So you would simply send us your peer-reviewed paper, and we do all the work for you. We would write an article in this sort of broader layman-friendly language. We produce all the images and graphics. We have a voiceover artist that will record a podcast for you, an audiobook, and we have an animation team that will produce an animated video. As I mentioned before, we don't publish out your approval, so you will see all of that work. You sign it off. If you need any edits and changes, you just let us know. You don't need to edit anything yourself. You just tell us what you want changed. We'll change it. But that's the biggest difference, is that we do all of that. And then the other thing that we do is the distribution side of things. So we have subscribers, obviously, on all of our different platforms, and we have a network that we can go out to do press and things like that. So roughly, we estimate through a syndicated audience, we'll achieve over 1 million people to sort of read these articles and things. So it's the balance of the two. It's simply, send us a paper or multiple papers to summarize, however you want to put that together. If you've got 2 or 3 papers on a particular project, we could summarize those into one article. And then we'll produce an article, an audiobook, and a video, and then do the distribution side of things to make sure we're getting people to engage with them.
What's the relationship between Scientia and ICI Pod?
Oh, so it's so Science Diffusion is, you could say, the holding company.
Okay.
And then Scientia is the written format and produces video, and then SciPod is the audiobook service.
Oh, okay.
So we own them both. It's under the same umbrella, but they're just 2 different brands.
So one is Scientia is making video, and SciPod is making audio, right?
Yeah, Scientia is written articles, videos, and the magazine, like the outreach, and then SciPod is very specifically just the audiobook service. We have the audiobook and the podcast as a standalone service because it gets so much engagement and impact, which I think we mentioned, and we even look at some of these stats. So it's such an important platform for people to communicate on. We actually do it as a standalone thing as well. Because right now, for the engagement rate, if you're a researcher who's struggling with engagement, even when you put out materials, I'd seriously look at doing podcasts because you just get such a good engaged audience.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will. Tom 的意思是，他们是一家就是作者服务公司，就是他们做的就是可以帮助这个科研工作者做出根据他们的文章可以做出一个 video， 一个短的 video， 还有一个短的音频和视频，然后可以介绍工作，然后他们会帮你推广，就是okay, I think podcast is not a new thing, but use podcast to promote science is new, right? I'm not sure if I'm right. So how do you think?
Yeah, it's one where it kind of feels like it's not that new anymore, but it's probably less than 10 years before we saw scale, like about maybe 10 years ago, 2009 to 2012 is when podcasts really started to take off. In the last 5 years is where we've seen a big shift, I would say, in the podcast industry. China are actually really leading the way in that. I think the Chinese market produces more podcasts than any other market. But certainly everybody else is there or thereabouts. I think if you look at some of this data, this is 2018. This is
there's no data.
This is all up from here. If you look like South Korea, for example, more than half the population listen to podcasts. You get such a ridiculous engagement. But if you looked at this kind of graphic in 2000, then I think this would be incredibly small numbers. It wasn't really as prevalent as it is. It was much more maybe just younger people, whereas now it's everybody, all demographics, different age ranges, and certainly affluent markets, which, you don't want to exclude people who, just because they're from a poorer background or things like that. That's not what I'm saying. Of course, you want to engage with those people, and those people do listen to podcasts, but we just see on average the types of people who are listening to podcasts tend to be more educated or from more affluent areas, or they hold higher positions, whether it be in businesses or governments. And so I think that's been the biggest change over the last, say, 5 years or so, is that demographic coming into this marketplace and engaging with a huge amount of podcasts, which has then funded the whole cycle, right? So now people are producing huge amounts of podcasts and they're being consumed. And the good thing is, right now, although there's a lot of shows still in the podcast world, it is not in comparison to something like TV. If you think, there's way more TV shows and TV programs being produced than anybody watching them. Whereas in podcasts, it's almost a little bit the opposite way at the moment still, where there's more people wanting to engage with podcasts, especially in the education area, because most people don't realize that education and science is such a huge market for podcasts. So lots of podcasters produce things in like comedy or sports or politics and things like that, where people are wanting education. So to produce scientific podcasts go down really, really well. So it's a good opportunity right now.
Mm-hmm. There's no data from China in your chart?
Yes. I only took this one. It's a little bit hard to find the data, I'll be honest, in a nice, concise way. But I don't know how you say that. Ixmalia?
Yeah, Himalaya.
Himalaya, okay.
Himalaya.
So they're just one company, right?
Yeah, it's a well-known. I think it's the biggest company in China for audio. Podcast.
And so, so if I said, like NBC, for example, they don't have 530 million listeners.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not even 500 million people live in the United States to watch NBC. And this one company is got that amount of viewership and listeners is staggering. Like if I added up all of the other companies, it's just ridiculous. Like people in China are going absolutely bonkers for podcasting right now. It's a really, really big market. And it certainly is everywhere else. It's really well engaged. Millions of people listening to them all of the time. I think it's the accessibility that's probably the thing that's driving it the most, and the environment in which somebody listens to a podcast. You think, every time you're doing something like driving the car, cooking, walking the dog, all sorts of things like this, you've got capacity to be doing something like active with your mind, because the task you're doing is very passive. Like you don't have to think about it so much. Obviously, you should be concentrating when you drive a car. But you can obviously listen to something while you're driving a car. So when you're taking the train or the bus or something, and so a podcast makes a really good kind of way to do that. I also think this is my personal opinion, but I think it's one where lots of people don't have the confidence to watch something in a public place, because then other people can see what you're doing, and lots of people don't like that. So if you wanted to, especially if you're like the area of science, right? The reputation is like, oh, you're a nerd, right? But really, people secretly love it. They really love it a lot. And that shows in the data. And I think why it stands out so much in podcasting is because people can't see what you're listening to. And so it's like, oh yeah, well, you're listening to, I'm listening to Dr. Dre or hip hop or something. It was really, they're not. All these kids are walking around listening to science because that's actually what they want to listen to, as shown by the data. Like, it's, but people can't see what they're doing. And so when you're out in public, I think it's a good one for people to do. They feel safe about it, and so they engage with it a lot. So yeah, that's the
my question is so there are too many data now. So how to when I after I'm making a video or audio, so it's not easy to be founded. So almost zero value on YouTube or other platform. So that's the problem. So
it is a really, really major problem. Yes, there's no point in producing any of this content if nobody sees it. What's the point? And so this is where I was sticking on that first principle, the Hollywood principle. There are plenty of movies that are released that nobody watches, and I can almost guarantee that meant the actors in that movie didn't go on any talk shows, because there's a lot of competition. And you're right, if you produce a video and you put it on your own YouTube channel, I'm not saying it can't get a lot of millions of people to view it. Of course it could do, but it will be extremely difficult for you to do. Versus if I just go on to somebody else's channel that already have a platform, that already have subscribers, I don't need to worry about that. And I think that's the thing for researchers, where they're very worried about it, because they should be, but they're not realizing that they don't have to be responsible for it. You can just use somebody else's platform. Like we have, millions of people engaged in our products across all the things that we produce, the articles, documents, and videos, and all that. We've got millions of people engaged with it. It's very easy for us to get viewership on all of our stuff because we already have an audience. And so you just need, you don't have to be with us. Obviously, I would like you to, to work with us and publish with us. That would be great. But you can think about it. And even if you do work with us, everything we produce is under the Creative Commons license, so you can use it yourself. So go to other people and publish it there. It's okay for you to put a video on our YouTube channel and your university's YouTube channel and 6 other platforms. That's okay. You see these videos that go viral, the video has gone viral, but the person sharing it is different in almost every instance, right? Because people are sharing the videos and they're sharing the content, and that's how things get picked up and they start to spiral, is because they're picked up by lots of different people. So it's not like you have to produce one video and it only goes in one place ever once and you have to hope for the best. You can do what I'm saying here with these TV shows, like the actors, right? They take it on tour. They go to all these different places, have a video that does really well, contact a bunch of bloggers about science and say, hey, I've got a video, so you've got no video content for your subscribers might be interested in this. You're welcome to use this video on your blog. Great. And they've got 6,000 people who subscribe to their blog every week. And now the video comes up in the email to that blog list that says, hey, we've got a video for you this week. Do you know what's going to happen there? They're going to get a higher click-through rate and they're going to get more people open that email. And now you're going to get more viewership. So you're right that just putting it in one place, and if it's on your own channel, it's probably not going to do very well. And so that's why you've got to think about this principle of like, how am I going to get that distribution? I need to find the people with the audience. You don't need to, there's always a thing like people think they need to create traffic or they need to create an audience. You don't. The audiences already exist. There are thousands upon thousands or millions of people. Like, if you're a physicist, you contact this person and say, here's a video. I thought you might like it for your channel. He's already got almost 5 million people following his content. If he thinks, yeah, that's good, actually, I'll put that up. Great. Now you can have millions of people view that video. Right? Super easy. Give it to us. Let us produce this and put it on our YouTube channel. Same sort of thing. We'll get our viewers to immediately see it because we've already built an audience. So you don't need to go and build one yourself. You just need to find where they already are and put the content there.
Okay.
Does that answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But usually it's not free, and maybe they do not agree to do that. Usually they will not agree to post that, right?
Yeah, they might not do. You might contact this person and he says, no, it's not suitable. You contact that person, they say it's 10 grand. You contact that person and they say yes.
Okay.
right?
Okay.
You know, yeah, it's not like you just necessarily go out to one person and that's it. You might have to contact a bunch of people for sure, which is, you know, why we do PR. This is why like we do this kind of thing for people. It's because it's time consuming, it's difficult, it's, you know, it's a lot of work. And so, you know, like I was saying here, you know, you have options. You can do this yourself and go and contact 100 different blog artists, or you could just have us do it for you. That's up to you. But that is the way to get it viewed. You know, in the same way, if you wanted to publish a manuscript, right, you've got a manuscript and you want to get it published, you send it to one publisher, and if they reject it, what do? You either edit it and send it back, or you send it to somebody else. And it's the same sort of thing here. If somebody, you know, says, oh no, I don't want you on my podcast because I don't think my audience cares about you, well, that's okay. There's hundreds of different podcasts to go on. Contact someone else, you know, go on there. There's plenty of places for you to go to where there are already audiences. You know, especially when we're thinking of an international level, there are so many different places that you could be that have millions of people. It's why I showed right at the beginning all those different channels. It's not like there's one YouTube channel, and I just picked a handful. Like I could have probably had, you know, a 3-hour webinar just showing you different YouTube channels for science. So people really, really care and want to know about science. It's there are so many places that you can go and get an audience and find something. The thing, obviously, the thing to keep in mind is that the quality still needs to be good, right?
Yeah, sure.
Like, you know, this person's not going to put something on their YouTube channel that looks horrible. So, you know, quality still needs to be there. It's not like you can just publish anything. But you know, you have plenty of opportunities. Don't just think because one person said no, that's the end of it. There are plenty of people you can communicate with, or sorry, reach out to get the stuff in front of their platform. The other thing to think about is the value exchange, right? This person here who makes, you know, minute physics, you know, it's going to take them time in order to put these little videos together. So if you've put one together for them, they might really appreciate that. They'll be like, wow, that you just saved me 3 hours of my time. Thank you so much. And they don't mind that it's your video and they mention your name and put a link to your website. That's fine because it's a good exchange for them. They save their time. They've got good content for their audience. Their audience is going to like, their audience is going to appreciate that. And in exchange, you got traffic to your paper or to your website or whatever it might be. So.
Okay. So I have some question from audience.
Yeah.
Do you have the question is how does scientists charge it for the distribution service? Well, what's that mean? Like distribution service?
How do we charge, or how does a scientist charge a researcher?
I think it's how you charge, right?
Okay, so our services, because it's a done for you service, right? So we've got writers, we've got graphic designers, we've got media content producers, we've got distribution side of things, PR people. So our services range anywhere from about $1,000 up to about $5,000, just depending on what you want. If you fill out this, if you go to this page, there's a contact form there. If you just fill that out, we can set up a call and I can understand a little bit about exactly what you want and then tell you what the price would be, but it will be in that ballpark between $1 and $5 grand, something like that. Or if you've got a much bigger project, there's an ongoing thing, obviously that could be slightly different, but roughly it'll be in that kind of ballpark. If you're not talking about us and how we charge and you're talking about yourself, some researchers do ask that of like how they should charge. And my general answer is it really, really, really depends a lot on what your objective is. And I would probably err towards not charging because you're already being paid, right? If you have a funded project, your time is being funded. So it doesn't matter if your time is spent doing research or doing outreach, your time is still covered by that cost. And so if you don't have, if you're not charging somebody, then it's much easier for you to get the distribution. Right. So for the way off, I would probably, if it's yourself and you're happy to put in the work yourself and you've got the time to do it, right? You know, option one, if you're going to do it yourself, I would probably not charge people to do it if you can afford not to, because you'll get bigger distribution. The because it'll be easier for them to say yes. Right? If I say to that Minute Physics, for example, I say, oh, we'll produce you a video and it's $5,000. They're far less likely to say yes than if I say, I'll produce a video for you and it's free. Just link to my website. You'll get more yeses. So if you've got a funded project, so your time is being covered, right, it's being paid for, you probably don't need to charge if you're producing the materials yourself. And so therefore I wouldn't charge other people because you'll get bigger distribution, which is the goal, right? Your goal is not to be paid, you've already been paid. The goal is to get your research out there into more people so that you can get further funding, collaborations, and get paid more in the future, right? So I'd think about it from that concept. Hopefully that answers both. I don't know if they were asking how much we charge or how much they should charge themselves. If you really do want to charge yourself for your own time, you want to become a science communicator, then do that. Obviously, that's up to you. And how much you charge is just based on how much you want to earn per hour. Is the way I would work that out.
So usually, yeah. how you what's the procedure of I mean, how you do that? How you make how you transfer paper to a video? How you do that?
Yeah, so we have a whole team really. So we'll have we have an editor, or editor-in-chief, that will oversee the project. We'll have a science writer and a journalist. So somebody who specializes in writing for the public, somebody who we'll always have somebody with a PhD in your field. If we don't already have somebody on staff, we will just get somebody in. And so between them, they'll translate your very complex message into something that's more easily understood, right? They'll do that kind of translation process, you could say. Once we've got the written text in place, then everything else can kind of start from there. Because you can edit the way you write a written article and the way you would do an audiobook is slightly different. People speak slightly different to how they write. So we'll just have somebody turn it into a script to be read out loud. And then that will go to a voiceover artist who will produce that. Then we've got a graphics team and an animation team. So a graphics team will produce obviously all the graphics and the imagery for the articles and like the art cover work for the audiobook and things like that. And then the animation team will obviously produce the animations for the video, but they'll do that based on the script because that's an easier way around to do it rather than doing the animation first and trying to talk over the top of it. It's easier to fit the animation to the words.
Cool.
Yeah.
Question. Do you know how journal how journal do to promote the papers? The question from audience: do you know how academic journal help the authors to promote their papers, their findings?
I mean, I don't work for an academic paper, so I probably know as much as you do. From what I do know, and I'm sure you probably just know this yourself, is they obviously have a subscriber base, and they just send it out to that. They've probably got some social media channels that they push them on. Ultimately, given the sheer volume that are published with them, for the most part, it looks like researchers are responsible for their own distribution as well. So it'll go out to whoever subscribes to that journal, but then if you want it out to other people, you're going to have to do that yourself. I think some of them offer like promotion services, perhaps, like pay them for like a press release or something, perhaps. But I mean, for the peer-reviewed stuff, you probably know most people in your field that you'd want it to go to, so you could just send it to them. And then you're hopefully, that's the kind of the point of publishing with a high-impact journal, is that they've got if you're a astrophysicist, you're going to publish in probably a handful of different papers because that's where all the astrophysicists go to find their papers. And so it should just be emailed to them, and that's normally how they distribute. But obviously I don't work for a peer-reviewed paper. They might do other things as well. So that's my kind of broad answer.
OK， 也就是说，这些期刊他们其实都在做这些推广的工作，推广发行的工作。就是你的文章发表了之后，他们都会在多多少少都会做一些推广的工作。就是包括现在很多的期刊都在中国也有微信那个微信公众号，然后你的文章发表之后，他们很多都是也在公众号上同步的去推广一下，还有发这种 email 推广啊，都是有的。 还有是自媒体上给你在推特上给你那个推广。What question is how researcher how researcher pick most valuable promotion? Do you know?
Yeah, how do you pick what to promote?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a couple of different answers. Kind of depends on what you're wanting to achieve. So you can look at this in a few different ways. Firstly, if it's been funded via a public like funding agency or like a government thing, so the taxpayer paid for it, it's very arguable that you should be promoting all of it, because otherwise, why did you get the funds? Right? If you think about that yourself, if I say to you, hey, I want you to give me, $1,000, and I'm not going to tell you what it's for, you just have to trust me, I don't think you're going to be very interested in doing that. So therefore, if you've taken public money, I suggest that you communicate it all to some capacity. Now, obviously, there are things that are just more important than others, and there are just things that have a bigger impact or you're more proud of or whatever it might be. And so therefore you could put more effort into those, but I wouldn't think of it if zero or everything. I'd think of it like a scale, like you should be doing some sort of promotion and everything that was publicly funded. And then pick the standout pieces for you. What's most interesting for you? Like, or what do you think has the biggest impact on society? Or you could always summarize things, right? If you've got, we often do that, right? That's normally where people are coming to us. Perhaps they've got, 3 or 4 papers they've had out. They've had a few blog articles that they've written themselves or their university have done, which has maybe got a few hundred or a few thousand people to view. But now they've kind of come to a conclusion of a project. So we're going to summarize 4 papers together and do a huge promotion out to millions of people, right? So you could think of it like that. Like each individual paper is going to have something, some lay-friendly version of it as well. But then once I come to the end of the project, I want to summarize everything up and get it out there in a mass scale and really make a big impact with it. So you could think of it like that. So I would just never think of it as zero, because unless if your project is privately funded, then you can think of it zero, because you just need to ask whoever funded it whether they care about that kind of thing or not, or whether you care, right? Even if it was a privately funded thing, if you want it out there because it builds your own reputation, then it's obviously worth doing. And then otherwise, I wouldn't necessarily pick topics that are the most popular, or what you feel like might be the most popular topic. I would pick the thing that you feel like has the most impact on society, because as long as you can communicate that impact, which is what you should be generally doing, as we've already discussed, that'll probably get better traction, right? Just making another article about stuff to do with AI, it'll kind of get lost a little bit because there's so much communications about it. What you need to do to stand out is have a really clearly defined, like, this is what this means, and this is the impact and why it's important. And if you've got a really strong message with that, it will go further, it will do better. So that's how I would pick if you are struggling and perhaps you've got limited times and funds and things, all things like that. Then I would pick the thing that has the most impact, because on the average person, because it will get the most amount of traction.
Okay. So yeah, there's no more question.
Cool, perfect. Gareth, I'm not sure if you have any on your. I think it's going out in 2 places, right?
Oh yes. Gareth.
You got any questions from your platform, Gareth? If he's still there, might run away.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is he is there. He's muted. I'm not sure. Perhaps he stepped away.
Okay,
yeah,
so
okay.
I have one last question. So, how do you have do you got some inquiry from China? So I mean, is still new service for Chinese scientists? For me, so I think it's pretty new. So. I live in US, but I think this kind of service is still new. So did you get some clients, customers from China already?
Yeah, we've worked with people in almost every country you can think of at this stage, and we've been going for almost 10 years now. Certainly, I would say, USA, Canada, probably Western Europe, the places that do the most amount of science communication, or at least put the most amount of effort into it. And so most of our clients come from those types of areas, which is relatively broad, right? There's like 2.5 continents. It's certainly more prevalent there. But I think the Asian market, and especially the Chinese market, are really starting to feel how important it is to be communicating well. So yeah, there's certainly a lot more traction there. You're in a very, very competitive market in which the person, it's one where you would hope the best science comes to the top, but realistically, you can't know about any science that wasn't communicated. So, the things that are coming, the way to be the best science wins is to have everybody communicate. Because if you're communicating, you give yourself that opportunity and people can see if it's good science or not. And I think people are really starting to realize that a lot more. And I also think in this world now, before the COVID, we were obviously in an environment over the last 10 years where we had an economic boom and everything was going well. There's money in the system. People were less, worried about getting funding. Whereas now, where we've gone through this pandemic, or still in this pandemic, people are much more worried about their funding. And so they're starting to realize that actually, if I'm not communicating things, or I'm not doing the things that are important to my funders, then I worry about it, right? There was a good one from somebody from Berkeley University, I think it was. I can't exactly remember. Maybe it wasn't them. Somebody in the US. Anyway, they put, here's an impact metric for you. If your government can cut the funding to your research and there's no public outcry, your science communication strategy is not working. Basically to say, if you can just be left to the wayside and nobody cares, you've got a problem with your communications, because nowhere on earth is some politician going to stand up and say, what I'm doing is I'm cutting funding to cancer research by 50%. That's not going to happen, because people will be outraged. It would cause devastation. Yet cancer is arguably overfunded and there's plenty of other diseases that need attention. But you're not going to hear that statement because it's so well communicated, is the point. And so if you look at things like the space race in the 60s, right, the 70s, it was much easier to get funding for something to do with getting a man on the moon then than it is now. Because then people cared. It was on TV, it was communicated well, the scientists were on TV, they were communicating, they were in newspapers, they were on radio shows. Whereas now you don't see that. There's not that many people communicating that. Most people can't name an astronaut now, whereas they could in the 60s and 70s. And so people care less, and so there's less funding available for it, and so therefore it's more competitive and more difficult. And so I think people are really starting to wake up to that, and especially in the Chinese market, where it is extremely competitive, and realizing that, actually not just the public being interested, but all those people who make those decisions, right? If every government official knows who you are, it's going to be a lot easier for you to get funding.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Which is, maybe a sad state of affairs, but that is how things work. So, that's my answer. Did you have any other questions?
No, okay, so there's no questions from audience. Okay, so we can end today. Thank you very much, Tom.
It's okay. Thank you, Ning, and thank you for everybody listening in. I hope you all had a good time. And if you do have other questions or you want to investigate, obviously you can go to scienceyear.global /science communication inquiry. If you go to that link, we can set up a time to talk. Happy to run through anything. But yeah, thanks, Ning. I appreciate putting this together.
Okay. Bye. Bye, Tom.
Bye for now. Mm-hmm. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so I will communicate with the Chinese audience. So
okay.
就是大家觉着如果有用的话，还可以继续跟那个 Tom 取得联系，他们就是可以帮助你们，就是做这个 video 啊，做这种做视频呀、做音频呀，扩展你们这个科研的这个工作的科研，帮你们把这个科研工作推广到全世界，通过这种方式推广到全世界。另外，我们是一家论文润色公司，然后论文润色公司，就是我们可以帮你们修改润色论文啊，然后就是如果你们有需求的话，也可以找我们。然后今天应该就是我们也有一个优惠码，然后可以找我们的这个讲课助手来索要这个优惠码，是一个9折的优惠码。OK，谢谢大家，拜拜。
Cheers, bye.
Thank you, Tom. Bye.
Thanks, Dean.